Today, the growth tide is receding. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, welcome to the latest post covering finance and property news with a distinctively Australian flavour. After yesterday's marathon, tonight is just a quick post, but it's a very important one because the IMF has been discussing global growth. And the news is frankly not good. IMF says that the growth is weakening and they're now forecasting global growth at 3% for 2019, and that's the lowest level since 2008 and 9. And that's a 0.3 percentage point downgrade from April, so in 6 months. And they say that growth is projected to pick up to 3.4% in 2020, which is still a downward revision compared with April. And it's to do with, hopefully, improved economic performance in a number of emerging markets like Latin America and the Middle East, and emerging and developing Europe. But the huge uncertainty they talk about relates, of course, to projected slowdowns in China and the United States. And they call out prominent downside risks because of the subdued pace of global activity. And if that is the case, then indeed their pessimism may be underscored even more next year. And they talk about trying to forestall such an outcome. Policies should be decisively aimed at diffusing trade tensions, reinvigorating multilateral cooperation, and providing timely support to economic activity where needed. And they say to strengthen resilience, policymakers should address financial vulnerabilities that pose risks to growth in the medium term. And making growth more inclusive is essential, they say, for securing better economic prospects for all, and that should remain an overarching goal. That's, of course, an IMF special because they are very much talking about global cooperation. But, of course, the fact of the matter is that we're now in a world where regionalism and nationalism is swinging back into vogue, and things like the trade tensions and trade talks are, I think, likely to continue and to continue to develop and get worse. So global growth is definitely threatened. Now here is a table which shows the trends, and Australia is on the list there. So Australia is now projecting a 1.7% real GDP projection. That was compared with 2.7 back in 2018. And they're talking about a rise in 2020 to 2.3%, but I have to say that's perhaps a little bit optimistic. Now, the other thing to say is that they're talking about the unemployment rate staying in the 5.1 to 5.1 range in both 2019 and 2020. Of course, at the moment, it's actually at 5.3%, so that may well be understated. And you can see there also in the chart below that the Australian story is again one where growth is easing. Now, no surprises for anybody watching DFA because, of course, we've been talking about this for so long time, and we've been noticing specifically the slowdown in consumer spending, business investment, and the economy being supported by a significant trade balance thanks to the iron ore situation and also government investment spending. So it was interesting that the IMF also made a statement about iron ore. And they said, specifically, iron ore prices increased 6.7% between February 19 and August 19. Widespread disruptions, including the Vale Dam collapse in Brazil and tropical cyclone Veronica in Australia, coupled with record high steel output in China, pushed iron ore prices to 5-year highs during the first half of 2019. However, they say the normalisation of previously disrupted operations and escalating trade tensions between the US and China triggered a sharp correction in August, partially offsetting the gains since the beginning of the year. And again, this is a theme that I've been talking about. Iron ore prices are down from $120 to a much lower number now, and are likely to continue to drift lower further ahead, which means that our trade balances will not be so positioned well ahead. And there was one other comment in the report which essentially spoke to the question of whether cutting interest rates and going very low on rates would be sufficient to address the global growth deficit. And the short answer is no. They said that cutting rates lower won't be sufficient. It may help, but it won't be sufficient to turn growth around. And they underscored the need for fiscal strategies to fire local economies. And I guess the final point I wanted to leave you with was this, and this is the question that I keep wrestling with. Is it feasible to continue with such strong global growth indefinitely? Or are we going to get to the point where, in fact, global growth will never be able to reassert itself? And, we are probably using 2 to 2.5 times the resources of the planet even now. And so it becomes very questionable as to whether it is feasible for global growth to continue. But the IMF and other global entities, as well as governments around the world, are all fixated on growth. I have the view that possibly now we should be thinking about a different plan, and that plan would be a much more sustainable approach to growth rates. What that would also mean is, of course, that quality of life would be different and wages growth would be different. But I wonder whether there's a need now to think differently about those global parameters. Because otherwise, just chasing our tail for more growth seems ultimately, to me, to end in disaster down the track at some point in the future. But there again, maybe I've just got my black hat on tonight. But nevertheless, the IMF is calling out that global growth continues to slow. And in response today, the stock markets around the world are quite buoyant because of positive results in the US. But the Aussie dollar slipped again to the low 67s. And we expect that to continue further south ahead. I'm Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics. Many thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.